You're about to meet 10 people who had a fantastic idea for 5 seconds and a fatal one for the rest of their lives. This isn't just a list of dumb ways to die. It's a collection of stories where the punchline was a tombstone. Do not attempt to top any of these high scores. 1. In the heart of London, under the cloak of a moonless, drizzly night, a small-time burglar named Alfie was experiencing a sudden dramatic career crisis. The second-story flat he had so skillfully broken into, a flat he was sure was empty, was suddenly not. The sound of a key turning in the front door lock was a sound of pure, ice-cold panic. The primary exit was compromised. His only way out was the window he'd come through, which now overlooked a 10-foot drop to a hard, unforgiving cobblestone alley. A jump was out of the question. A broken leg was just a delayed trip to jail. He needed a rope, and he needed it now. His frantic eyes darted around the master bedroom and landed on the wardrobe, a treasure trove of potential escape materials. A brilliant, albeit completely unoriginal idea, borrowed from a dozen action movies, flashed in his mind. He would improvise. He began yanking clothes from their hangers, his brain working in a frantic triage of textiles. Sturdy denim jeans, perfect anchor, a thick woolen sweater, excellent. A crisp cotton dress shirt, good length. And then he saw it, a shimmering, stylish silk shirt. Its smoothness, he reasoned, would make for a less abrasive descent. In his panicked state, he was a master of improvisation, a resourceful survivalist. He laid out his clothing chain on the floor, planning his knots with the supposed precision of a master sailor. He tied the jeans to the sweater to the cotton shirt. The final and most critical link was connecting the sturdy cotton to the treacherously smooth silk. He tied a knot that felt strong and secure to his trembling, adrenaline-fueled hands, but was, in the sober light of textile science, a complete and utter failure waiting to happen. He anchored his creation to a heavy, cast-iron radiator, gave it a couple of confident, reassuring tugs, and scrambled out the window just as he heard voices entering the flat. He began his descent, a modern-day Rapunzel of crime, his feet finding purchase on the weathered brick. For the first few feet, it held. A wave of triumphant relief washed over him. He was a genius. He was going to make it. But as his full 180-pound weight settled onto the makeshift rope, the crucial knot between the cotton and the silk was put to the ultimate test. The laws of friction, which he had so spectacularly failed to consider, delivered their non-negotiable verdict. The slick, low-friction fibers of the silk, under the full strain of his body, began to slip against the coarse cotton. The knot didn't snap. It simply, silently, and treacherously unraveled. There was a soft, almost inaudible shup as the silk gave way, and Alfie's daring escape instantly became a gravity-powered plummet. His descent was indeed much, much faster than planned, ending with a sickening final thud on the cobblestones below. He had seen enough movies to come up with a clever plan, but had clearly missed the lesson on the importance of choosing the right materials for the job. 2. The annals of criminal history are filled with tales of brilliant, meticulously planned heists. This is not one of them. In a deserted office park in Belgium, 2 aspiring thieves, Luc and Jean-Claude, were standing on the verge of a great victory. They had successfully bypassed the building's security and were now standing in a second-floor office, face-to-face with their prize, a hulking 400-pound antique safe. The problem, they now realized, was one of logistics. The safe was far too heavy to be carried down the narrow, winding staircase. Luc, the self-appointed brains of the two-man operation, began to pace, a look of intense, if misguided concentration on his face. And then, it hit him. An idea so simple, so direct, it could only have been conceived by a man with a complete and utter contempt for the laws of physics. "I've got it," he announced with the confidence of a certified genius. "We'll just push it out the window. I'll go downstairs and you can drop it to me. I'll catch it." Jean-Claude, the brawn of the outfit, looked at the massive steel box, then back at his friend, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Catch it, Luc. It must weigh 400 pounds. Luc waved away his concerns with an impatient flick of his wrist. "Don't be a coward," he scoffed. "It's only a 2-story drop. I won't catch it like a baseball. I'll just break its fall, you know. Guide it down gently. It will be fine." Convinced by this deeply, catastrophically flawed logic, Jean-Claude nodded. Luc went downstairs and took his position on the cold asphalt directly below the window. He planted his feet, bent his knees, and held his arms out, a human crash pad ready to receive the incoming payload. Upstairs, Jean-Claude grunted and strained, slowly wrestling the monstrously heavy safe towards the open windowsill. With a final, mighty shove, he sent it on its way. The safe did not descend gently. It fell the way a 400-pound block of solid steel falls, with the brutal, accelerating fury of pure, concentrated gravity. Down below, Jean-Claude looked up, his expression of nervous anticipation instantly melting into one of pure, wide-eyed final-moment horror as the small, dark shape above him grew with terrifying speed. He had been told to catch the safe, and to his credit, he did. He successfully broke the safe's fall with every bone in his body. The resulting impact was less of a catch and more of a human-shaped crater. Their plan, a masterwork of overconfidence and a complete failure to grasp the concept of kinetic energy, had a very flat and very fatal ending. The safe, however, was probably fine. 3. In a small, sleepy town in Brazil, a man named Marco was a legend, but not for any noble reason. He was the local prankster, a man whose sense of humor was a unique and often cruel blend of elaborate and mean-spirited. His best friend Paolo was his favorite canvas, the primary victim of his twisted artistry. One afternoon, while driving down a quiet country road, Marco had a stroke of evil genius. He spotted a dead porcupine on the roadside. A normal person would have felt a twinge of sadness and driven on. Marco saw a golden opportunity. He saw a prop. He saw the foundation for his masterpiece. He pulled over, carefully placed the spiky carcass in his trunk, and drove straight to Paolo's house, a wicked and intricate plan already blooming in his mind. He knew that Paolo had a beloved armchair, a big, plush, ridiculously comfortable throne that he would sink into every evening. This chair would be the stage for his magnum opus. He let himself into Paolo's house while he was at work, carrying his spiky instrument of chaos. He wasn't just going to place the porcupine on the chair. That was lazy, amateurish work. He was going to create a surprise of pure, needle-sharp agony. For the next hour, he meticulously and painstakingly harvested the hundreds of sharp, barbed quills from the dead animal. Then, with the steady hand and intense focus of a mad watchmaker, he began to arrange them, one by one, on the seat and back of Paolo's favorite chair. He embedded their points just deep enough into the fabric to make them stand perfectly upright, creating an invisible minefield of pain. He was turning a piece of comfortable furniture into a medieval torture device. He stood back, chuckling to himself, picturing Paolo's yelp of surprised agony. He was so engrossed in his meticulous, evil craft, so lost in his vision of the perfect prank, that he had lost all awareness of his surroundings. After placing the final, perfectly positioned quill, he took a step back to admire his handiwork. As he did, his heel caught on the curled edge of a small area rug. He stumbled, his arms flailing as he tried to regain his balance, but his momentum carried him forward with the precision of a guided missile, straight into the chair he had just transformed into a medieval torture device. In a moment of pure, sublime, and instant karmic justice, he fell, not backwards, not sideways, but head and chest first, slamming full weight onto hundreds of barbed quills that drove deep into his skin, piercing his face, throat, and torso. In seconds, the barbed spikes punctured vital arteries and lungs, leaving him gasping in shock on the very throne of pain he had built. His magnum opus prank had worked perfectly, just not on the audience he had planned. In the ultimate twist of karma, Marco had literally pranked himself to death. 4. In the humid, late-night haze of a Florida city, a man named Ricky had just pulled off what he considered a moderately successful convenience store robbery. He had a bag full of cash, a racing heartbeat, and a head full of bad action movies. As he sat in his small, cluttered apartment, counting his loot, a wave of paranoia began to wash over him. He had seen enough movies to know that large amounts of stolen cash are often embedded with secret, high-tech tracking devices. In his mind, the crisp $20 bills on his coffee table were not just money. They were a homing beacon, broadcasting his location to every police car in the state. He needed to deactivate them. He needed a way to neutralize this invisible, and in this case, completely imaginary, threat. A smarter criminal might have tried to spend the money quickly, or perhaps even considered that the tracking device trope is largely a cinematic invention. But Ricky was not a smarter criminal. He was a man of simple, direct, and catastrophically flawed solutions. His gaze fell upon his greasy, decade-old microwave oven. An idea, a truly brilliant spark of idiotic genius, ignited in his brain. Microwaves, he reasoned, emit powerful waves that disrupt electronics. He would simply microwave the cash. The radiation would fry the trackers, rendering them useless and laundering his money in the most literal sense. Beaming with pride at his own cleverness, he stuffed the entire wad of bills, a few $100s in various denominations, into the microwave. He set the timer for 2 minutes on high, just to be safe, and hit start. He failed to consider, or perhaps never knew, a critical feature of modern currency: the metallic security strips and inks woven into the fabric of the bills. The moment the microwave's magnetron fired up, these tiny metal fragments reacted exactly as any metal does in a microwave. They began to arc and spark violently. Ricky's brilliant anti-tracking device had instantly transformed into a pyrotechnic light show. A shower of brilliant white-hot sparks erupted inside the machine, and the paper bills, which are essentially flammable cotton, ignited. The microwave became a containment vessel for a raging cash bonfire. Thick, black, acrid smoke, smelling of burning plastic and shattered dreams, began to pour from the vents, quickly filling his small, poorly ventilated apartment. Panicking, he tried to open the door, but the fire inside was too intense. He had been so focused on a fictional high-tech threat that he had created a very real, very low-tech one. He was found later by concerned neighbors, lifeless on the floor, overcome by smoke inhalation, not taken down by the police, but by his own paranoid and catastrophically stupid laundering scheme. The money, his prize, was reduced to a blackened, unrecognizable lump of carbon. 5. A deep and passionate obsession with history can be a beautiful thing, a way to connect with the past and understand the world. For a man in England named Alistair, however, this obsession was about to become fatal. Alistair was a historical reenactor and an amateur culinary historian, a man who believed that to truly understand an era, you had to taste it. His latest project was his most ambitious yet. He was going to host an authentic, multi-course medieval banquet for his friends. And when he said authentic, he meant authentic. He insisted on using only period-accurate ingredients, cooking methods, and recipes he had painstakingly translated from ancient texts. The centerpiece of this grand feast was to be a roasted peacock, a dish famously served to kings and queens, its iridescent feathers often reattached for a spectacular presentation. Sourcing the bird was the first challenge, but he eventually found a specialty breeder. The second, and far more critical challenge was the cooking. Alistair, in his obsessive quest for authenticity, had read that medieval chefs often cooked their birds lightly to keep the meat tender. What he had failed to research in his ancient texts was the grim reality of medieval food safety. Peacocks, like many game birds, can be natural carriers for a host of dangerous bacteria, most notably a very high load of salmonella. Modern cooking standards, which he dismissed as a form of culinary coddling, demand that such birds be cooked to an internal temperature high enough to kill these pathogens. Alistair, however, was a purist. He roasted the peacock over an open fire, just as his research dictated, cooking it until it was golden brown on the outside but still dangerously undercooked on the inside. He proudly presented the magnificent, if bacterially compromised, bird to his guests. To prove its perfection, he, as the host and chef, took the first and largest portion for himself, savoring what he believed was the true, unadulterated taste of history. The taste was, in fact, that of a virulent, aggressive food poisoning. Within hours, he was violently ill. But even then, he likely saw his suffering as part of the authentic experience, a medieval malady to go with his medieval meal. But this was not a minor upset. The salmonella infection was so severe that it overwhelmed his system, leading to septic shock and catastrophic organ failure. His friends, who had eaten smaller portions, suffered but recovered. Alistair, however, had devoured the largest serving, and the infection tore through his body with medieval brutality. His obsessive pursuit of the perfect, authentic meal didn't just bring him closer to history, it killed him in the most tragically period-accurate way possible. 6. In the age of viral videos, the line between citizen journalist and reckless idiot can become dangerously blurred. In a bustling city in China, a woman was walking down a crowded sidewalk when she noticed something alarming. A small sinkhole, no bigger than a dinner plate, had opened up in the concrete ahead. It was a clear and present danger, a sign of a deeper, unseen problem beneath the surface. A sensible person would have given it a wide berth, perhaps warned others, and moved on. But this woman saw not a danger, but an opportunity. She saw a potential viral video. This was her chance for 15 minutes of internet fame. She immediately pulled out her smartphone and began to film, providing a breathless, running commentary on the developing situation. Instead of moving away, she did the exact opposite. She moved closer, driven by the insatiable need to get the perfect, most dramatic shot. "You can see it's getting bigger," she probably narrated, her voice a mixture of feigned concern and genuine excitement. She walked right up to the edge of the small, crumbling hole, completely ignoring the audible groans and creaks of the stressed concrete beneath her feet. Her friends, who were with her, pleaded for her to get back. But she was in the zone, a director in the midst of her masterpiece. For the ultimate close-up, she leaned her entire upper body directly over the edge of the sinkhole, pointing her camera down into the darkness. At that exact moment, the ground, which had been issuing warnings she had willfully ignored, decided it had had enough. The small hole did not get slightly bigger. The entire section of sidewalk she was standing on collapsed in a sudden, catastrophic implosion. With a sound like a clap of thunder, the ground simply vanished from beneath her. Her quest for the perfect viral video of a disaster had ended with her becoming the star of it. She was swallowed by the very phenomenon she was trying to document, a final, brutal lesson that when nature is sending you a warning sign, it's usually not a good idea to lean in for a closer look. Her final video likely captured a spectacular, if brief, first-person perspective of her own demise. 7. The relationship between a landlord and a problematic tenant can be a special kind of Cold War, a battle of wills fought over late rent and loud parties. For one landlord, a man named Mr. Henderson, this war was about to escalate into a final, catastrophic chemical offensive. He had a tenant from hell, a young man who paid rent sporadically, played loud music at all hours, and generally treated the apartment with the respect one might afford a public toilet. Mr. Henderson had tried everything: polite requests, angry phone calls, official eviction notices. Nothing worked. The tenant was a fortress of apathy, and Mr. Henderson was at his wits' end. He decided to take matters into his own hands. He was going to encourage the tenant to leave. His plan was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive chemical warfare. He would fumigate the apartment himself using a powerful industrial-grade pesticide he had bought online, a toxic fog so unpleasant it would surely drive the tenant out. He waited for a day when he knew the tenant was at home. He put on a cheap painter's mask, a completely inadequate defense against the neurotoxins he was about to unleash, and went to the tenant's door. He then meticulously sealed the door from the outside with heavy-duty duct tape, ensuring that none of the poisonous gas could escape into the hallway. He had created a perfect sealed chamber. He then moved to the apartment's external air intake vent, and, with a grim sense of satisfaction, he emptied several cans of the potent pesticide directly into the system. He had done it. His brilliant, if highly illegal, eviction plan was in motion. He then retired to his own apartment, which was conveniently located directly upstairs, to wait for the sweet sound of his tenant fleeing in a cloud of poison. There was one tiny critical and utterly fatal detail he had failed to consider: the shared ventilation system. In older buildings, the HVAC systems are often interconnected. The same network of ducts that was pumping the toxic fumes into his tenant's apartment was also, with ruthless efficiency, circulating that same poisoned air directly into his own. As he sat in his favorite armchair, congratulating himself on his cleverness, he was unknowingly breathing in the very same chemical cocktail he had intended for his tenant. The cheap mask he had worn earlier was now useless. He likely felt the first symptoms, dizziness, a headache, and dismissed them as a stress reaction. But as the concentration of the neurotoxin in his own apartment grew, his brilliant plan began to backfire in the most spectacular and silent way possible. He had been so focused on sealing his tenant's fate that he had forgotten he was breathing the same air. He was found the next day by the mailman, a victim of his own perfectly executed and tragically misdirected chemical attack. The problematic tenant, meanwhile, had apparently left for the weekend an hour before the fumigation began. 8. Faith can be a source of incredible strength and comfort, a guiding light in a dark world. But when faith becomes untethered from the basic, non-negotiable laws of science, it can become a fast track to a very shocking end. In a village in India, a man named Suresh was a devout and fervent follower of the Hindu monkey god, Hanuman, a deity known for his incredible strength, agility, and power. Suresh was not just a follower. He believed he was a vessel, a chosen one who could, through sheer devotion, absorb and channel the god's divine powers. He wanted to prove his connection, to perform a miracle that would demonstrate his holy status to the world. His chosen stage for this demonstration was not a temple, but a massive steel, high-tension electrical tower that loomed over the nearby fields. He saw the tower not as a piece of dangerous industrial infrastructure, but as a modern-day jungle gym, a perfect place to mimic the playful, acrobatic feats of his chosen deity. He announced to a group of onlookers that he was going to climb the tower and swing from the wires, just as Hanuman would swing from the jungle vines, and that the god's power would protect him from all harm. Ignoring the frantic pleas of a nearby utility worker, he began his ascent. He climbed with a strange, focused grace, his mind filled with visions of divine glory. He reached the top of the tower, 100 feet in the air, a tiny figure among a web of thick, humming electrical cables. He looked down at the small crowd below, raised his arms in a gesture of triumph, and then, with a faithful leap, he began to swing. He grabbed onto the thick, high-voltage wires, his hands closing around the conduits carrying an astonishing 132,000 volts of raw, untamed electrical power. In his ecstatic state, he believed that Hanuman's divine energy would flow into him, transforming him into a demigod. He was right about the energy flowing into him. He was tragically wrong about its nature. The 132,000 volts passing through the wires were not impressed by his faith. The human body, which is mostly water, is an excellent conductor of electricity. The moment he made contact, his body became an instantaneous, perfect circuit, a bridge for an amount of electrical energy so vast it is difficult to comprehend. He was electrocuted in a fraction of a millisecond, his divine performance ending in a brilliant, violent arc flash. His quest to prove he could channel the power of a god had ended with a fatal, first-hand demonstration of the power of a municipal electrical grid. 9. The combination of alcohol, firearms, and unchecked bravado has a long and storied history of producing tragic and utterly preventable outcomes. At a dull, late-night party in a small town in Croatia, a man named Goran decided that what the evening needed was a jolt of high-stakes, life-threatening entertainment. He was going to demonstrate his bulletproof qualities and the incredible marksmanship of his best friend, Pedar. Their chosen stunt was a modern and infinitely more stupid version of the William Tell legend. Goran would balance a full beer can on his head, and Pedar would shoot it off with a high-powered air rifle. To their alcohol-soaked minds, this seemed like a foolproof plan. An air rifle, they reasoned, wasn't a real gun, and Petar, according to himself, was a natural-born sniper. As the small crowd of partygoers gathered in the backyard, a palpable mixture of excitement and dread filled the air. Goran, with a wobbly, triumphant grin, placed the beer can on his head and stood with his back against a brick wall, assuming a pose of heroic stillness. Pedar, standing about 20 feet away, raised the air rifle. His aim, however, was severely compromised by the several hours of enthusiastic drinking he had just completed. The world through his eyes was a blurry, swaying mess. He tried to line up the sights, the tip of the barrel tracing lazy, unsteady circles in the air around his intended target. He saw 2 beer cans, 2 Garans, and chose the one in the middle. He took a deep breath, a technique he had probably seen in a movie, and squeezed the trigger. There was a sharp crack as the pellet left the barrel at over 800 feet per second. He missed the can, completely. He did not, however, miss the head. The small lead pellet, which they had so casually dismissed as a harmless toy, struck Goran in the temple with more than enough force to penetrate his skull. The party, which had been merely dull moments before, was now the scene of a shocking and senseless tragedy. Their attempt to liven things up with a bit of performative danger had succeeded all too well. A grim and final reminder that an air rifle is still a weapon, a drunk friend is never a sniper, and a beer can on your head is not a target, but a final, desperate cry for better judgment. 10. There are good plans, there are bad plans, and then there are plans that seem to have been conceived in a parallel universe where the laws of physics are merely gentle suggestions. In a rural corner of Pennsylvania, 2 men, let's call them Earl and Cletus, decided they were going to acquire a brand new soda machine, free of charge. Their target was a massive 800-pound vending machine, fully stocked, sitting on the second-story porch of a remote hunting lodge. The challenge was not getting it out of the lodge, but getting it down to their truck on the ground below. After a brief and clearly inadequate brainstorming session, they devised their brilliant plan. They would create a ramp. They found a long, sturdy-looking wooden plank and propped it up against the porch railing, its other end resting on the ground. It was a steep, precarious ramp, but to Earl and Cletus, it was a masterpiece of redneck engineering. Their plan was simple. They would push the 800-pound machine to the edge of the porch, line it up with the ramp, and then gently guide it down to the truck. The word gently was where their plan began to diverge from reality. They grunted and strained, slowly wrestling the top-heavy, monstrously heavy machine across the wooden porch. As they reached the top of their ramp, they gave it one final coordinated shove. The machine tipped onto the plank and, for a moment, it seemed to be working. But an 800-pound object on a steep, unbraked ramp does not gently slide. It accelerates. The soda machine, now a runaway 800-pound metal beast, shot down the wooden plank with the speed of a bobsled. Cletus, who had been in front of the machine guiding it, was now in a desperate losing battle with a half-ton of pure momentum. As the machine hit the bottom of the ramp, it didn't just stop. The sheer force of its descent launched it, and Cletus forward. The machine, due to its low center of gravity, landed with a heavy thud on the ground, standing perfectly upright, completely unharmed, and ready for business. Cletus, however, was not so lucky. The same force that had landed the machine safely had launched him like a catapult, sending him flying over the porch railing. He sailed through the air for a brief, terrifying moment before landing, fatally, on the hard ground below. The soda machine stood there, a silent, fully stocked monument to a perfectly executed and tragically flawed heist. All right, I want to see some honest answers in the comments. I'm willing to bet that every single person watching this has that one friend who is a walking liability. Without using their name, what is the dumbest, most dangerous thing you have ever personally witnessed that friend do? If you're thankful it's their story and not yours, hit like and subscribe.